Hey everybody, I'm Raj Kumar. I'm President Editor-in-Chief of DevX, back again for one of my leader conversations that we're doing during this intense period we're all in during this pandemic. And I'm really excited to have somebody who I always look forward to talking to back in normal life. You know, we run into each other here and there. Sanjeev Khagram, who is a big thinker, a global leader, somebody who has been working on so many of the issues that our community at DevX care about. Humanitarian issues, SDGs, data for sustainability. I mean, you name it. Sanjeev has left his imprint on so many of those, the issues that we all work on and care about every day. He's, of course, the dean at the Thunderbird School, graduate school, global graduate school, which is part of the Arizona State University system. You have so many affiliations, Sanjeev, for multi-stakeholder partnerships that you lead. You've worked at the UN. You've worked, you've been associated with the World Economic Forum for many, many years. So really just great to have you here. Thank you for taking some time.
Oh, it's an honor and privilege, Raj. I'm a big fan of yours, as you know, of DevX, your leadership in this complicated, complex world that we live in. So it's an honor and pleasure.
It is complicated. It is complex, and I'm hoping you can break it down a little for us. I mean, I don't know where to start. I mean, maybe just your overall take on where we are today with this pandemic, with the response to it. I'm sure you're getting a lot of questions from your students and your faculty. You know, how are you narrating the situation to them?
Yeah, I mean, I think about it, and I've been trying to make sense of it, because it is about sense making. And we've been doing wonderful webinars, and I've been listening to yours, which I really am so grateful for. And we had a wonderful one, and there was a phrase about dancing with complexity. That the world is so complex that the to the extent that we had the mirage of being able to manage it is it's completely that fantasy is completely broken. And the best is to be, the analogy of dancing. And I love music and dancing, and we at Thunderbird, as much as we take on the great challenges of our time, as DevX does, we want to do it in a joyful and an optimistic and positive way. And so the analogy of dancing means a lot. Let me answer your question. Three kind of time perspectives. The first one is very much over the last 6 months. My partner Diana Bowman is Australian. We were in Australia during those horrific fires that ended off last year and began this year. Little did we and most of the world know about the pandemic that was emerging and unfolding. You and I were at Davos in January as it was really just starting. And then the pandemic hits when it starts to, spread. Early on, we did some modeling that was very consistent with the modeling of the IMF and the bank and Bloomberg, you name it, OECD, where we sort of predicted or forecast is a better way to say that, depending on the extent of the pandemic, it would mean somewhere between a 0 to 0.5% decline in the global economy to where we are now. And basically, if it had been localized to China and a few other places, it was on the sort of lower end. And if it goes global, we're in virtually a global depression. And sadly, here we are today. Obviously, that incredible health, human consequences in terms of physical health, but we know mental health, emotional health, psychological health, spiritual health, and then the global economy. Now we expect somewhere between 190 million to 300 million more people losing jobs, and that's just in the formal sector that we can count. I remember writing the report for the UN Secretary General on the impacts of the global economic crisis, 2008, 2010, on the poor and vulnerable. And we know the reverberations of that crisis. And this one is even more devastating to the lives of ordinary people. And
there's a lot of conversation in countries like the US that there's going to be a V-shaped recovery, or we're going to get out of this relatively quickly. The stock markets are moving and all that.
Right.
But in many of the countries we're talking about, where DevX community works and lives, there isn't the fiscal space to do big fiscal stimulus. And you've got lots of people working in the informal sector, sometimes 70, 80% of the population.
Exactly.
So they don't have a corporate entity that's going to say, we're going to protect your job. And we're going to, there isn't an unemployment insurance scheme in the same way there exists in much of the rich world. You're so right that the effects could be really devastating in a lot of these places.
Yeah. So, you know, and then we take a step back, Raj, and we think about pre-COVID. We have this analysis that is very similar to DevX, fractured globalism or fractured globalization, right? All the contradictions that were already happening. You know, globalization, which we at Thunderbird as a school that, you know, our famous motto that you know of and our participants might know is borders frequented by trade seldom need soldiers. And we know that's, you know, on the one hand, very powerful and it's inspiring to us, but it's not fully accurate. There's lots of complexities there, but nonetheless, this belief that, you know, bringing the world together can lead to sustainable peace and prosperity. And we know, though, that the last 25 of globalization has left far too many people behind. The planet is on fire, so to speak, and literally, if not figuratively. And the pandemic has only just, you know, in some sense, laid barren all of those contradictions, right? And accentuated and accelerated that. As you know, a big part of our focus is on, you know, what the World Economic Forum calls the fourth industrial revolution, what we see as just the cascading opportunities of multiple interacting technologies. And can we learn as a global species, a global humanity from the first, second, and third industrial revolutions to maximize the potential and minimize the cost? We see during the pandemic, this acceleration is happening. We're all working from home. We're doing these digital globinars. Everything, the digital transformation has been accelerated and accentuated, broadened, and deepened. So in many ways, the pandemic has only, you know, sort of revealed in more technicolor what was already, it seems to me, happening in the underlying global system, and forced us to be even more, you know, address it frontally rather than from, you know, the side or in different ways. So we at the Thunderbird School and ASU have really tried everything we can to be vanguards of embracing this new reality. And then we've had three principles, Raj. One is health, the health of our students, our faculty, our staff, our community members, our partners, our alumni around the world, everyone. Second, how can we realize our educational obligation? How do we create the most rich educational experiences from our women at the bottom of the pyramid that we train all over the world, women entrepreneurs, to our undergraduates, to our graduates, to our executives in this new reality? And three, how do we continue to advance our vision of sustainable and equitable prosperity, given the contradictions and complexities that the pandemic has only revealed and exacerbated? And so,
there's a lot of that I want to unpack. You know, people may have seen you in the news recently because, just to give you an idea how you're thinking, you had a virtual graduation with iPads on robots that, you know, I guess you as the dean were handing out diplomas to robots,
avatar robots.
I mean, so you're obviously thinking, you know, in a different way. And I want to get into, you know, the future of university education, where you think that's going to go. We have a lot of people following us at DevX who are, you know, university students who are thinking about doing a graduate degree. And also, what does it mean for careers in our sector? But just first on the pandemic itself, you know, you started to talk about how bad the economic situation can be. What do you think those of us who work in global development should be thinking about now when it comes to what the, you know, 6 months, a year, 2 years, kind of the after effects of this are? I've heard some people say, you know, the SDGs feel almost irrelevant now because it's like from a different era. Maybe we should change the date on them and make it, instead of 2030, it should be 2031 or 2032, because boy, this year is a huge setback. How are you thinking about that? How should we consider it?
Yeah, so I want to be very unequivocal about me. For me, we have to double down, triple down, whatever down we want to put it on the SDGs. It is the single greatest global consensus agreement that we have been able to assemble as a humanity. There are many problems, many missing pieces, many gaps and contradictions, but the way they were created, as you know, because you were such a phenomenal leader in doing that as DevXOS more generally, what they say, and they're, you know, sort of, they're a beacon for us. And you know, it is the decade of action. And sadly, the first 6 months, year of this decade of action has been engulfed by the pandemic, and now what we see here in the United States and obviously around the world in Hong Kong and so forth and so on. But for me, the SDGs remain a fundamental anchor for us in the global development community. And we at the Thunderbird School, I mean, I just sent off virtually, going back to education, 20 of our students on virtual internships for our project on SDGs, multi-stakeholder collaborations, utilizing new technologies in LA and Nairobi, where, you know, our students working with government officials in those cities, with private sector, with civil society, we're doubling down and tripling down. We believe that the SDGs need to be embraced even more than ever before.
Yeah, I think there is a sentiment about that as well. I mean, look, you might have a lot of governments that don't really support the SDGs, that are not aligned, but that's maybe even more reason to have them, right?
Absolutely.
Even more reason to double down. If we lose momentum on them now, you know, what's going to replace it?
I mean, I think we're action-oriented folks at Thunderbird. You know, I am personally, and so we have, it's, you know, no framework is going to be perfect. But I, you know, given the process of creating the SDGs, what the content is, and where we are in the global development world, with all the challenges that the pandemic again has kind of laid bare, my view is it's our greatest opportunity. It's an opportunity set for us to create the kinds of partnerships that can be truly transformative over the next decade.
Yeah. No, I think there's a lot to be said for that argument. The challenge is there hasn't really been a big push, you know, at a moment like this, when we know the effects of the pandemic are likely to be hardest in the lowest income countries, the most vulnerable people. You might see extended economic dislocation, maybe depression, as you said.
Yeah.
I mean, there isn't yet a lot of talk of big, bold financing ideas for global development or for climate, right? You know, we had interviewed Mark Lowcock in a conversation like this recently. He talks about a $90 billion humanitarian initiative. He's the UN humanitarian chief, of course. I spoke with Mark Dybel, and he says, you know, maybe we need a $30 billion public health fund of some kind. You know, there's now talk of the State Department trying to stand up a pandemic response unit. But there hasn't yet been a lot of talk of, hey, this is a crisis. We need to change the way we do things as a development sector, as a humanitarian sector, and just dramatically step up. And maybe it's because of the politics, certainly in the US and the UK. I don't know. How do you think about that?
Well, I guess it goes back to your first question, because the part that I didn't kind of explicitly articulate well enough is, you know, pre-pandemic, what we've seen around the world, in my view, is this wave of exclusionary parochialisms and nationalisms of the left and of the right across the board. And it has been a backlash against globalism, of global solidarity, of working together, multilateral, you know, all the different ways that one can think about it. And to me, that's the greatest threat. And what the pandemic is also, frankly, and sadly, in many ways, accelerating or showing the contradictions of, is the pull, the pull of these leaders, movements, and perspectives on creating discord and division and distrust, and frankly, therefore, destruction, rather than bringing the world together, rather than focusing on, you know, what is the next great financing package or the next great innovations that we can all work on together to make the better world a better place. Whether one use the SDGs or not, I am all in on the SDGs. We're all in on the SDGs. But so to me, the precursor to being able to create those new financing packages, the new development packs, compacts, or whatever we might call them, and build on all the great work that's been going on for, you know, years and years, is being able to transform this this period, this era, from one of this exclusionary and divisive politics to one that brings the world together. And that seems to me the precursor to getting where we want to go in the next wave of global development and, frankly, global governance more generally.
Yeah, and there are people on the streets today and all across the United States, all across the world, in part because they think there is a better future out there and they want to fight for it, right? They think there's a way to get past this, you know, some of the structural racism and the long-term kind of inequities in societies all over the world, including right here in our own home country.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, you know, I do believe there were incredible benefits to the 25 years of globalization, whatever length one might put around that, and language. But we know those, and I mentioned, and I know you agree, and there were tremendous costs. What also didn't happen is these fundamental, long-standing, systemic, structural failures were not addressed. And Black Lives Matter is an archetypical and horrifying, again, example of that. I remember, I'm sure you do, because we're about the same age, Rodney King, and that's 28 years ago. 28 years ago. But at the same time, as we look at ourselves, and we talk about our children. I have two young men of color. They're on the streets right now, and on the one hand, they're telling me, we understand even more now, Dad, why you do what you do, and why you're away so often, and why you've chosen to do this thing at Thunderbird and ASU and so forth. And on the one hand, it makes me feel proud, and that they are starting to see why, because we're trying to leave them and their children and all of our children for generations a much better society, a world, a planet than we had it. And yet, I have to be honest, Raj, there are times that I wonder, all that we've done over so many years, how did we get to this place where the world is on fire, the planet's on fire? But my mother always, who is my hero, would always say, when we work people like us, we work hard. And when things get tough, we work harder. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to roll up our sleeves, Raj, and we're going to work harder. We're going to try to work smarter, and we're going to work in partnership with great leaders and organizations like DevX, because I have complete faith in the capability of the human community and human ingenuity to solve these tremendous problems.
Yeah, and let's talk a little bit about how we're going to solve this university education and careers questions that I know so many people are asking, right? How are you thinking about this? Assuming this pandemic continues, people are not going to be able to necessarily be on campuses. There have been all kinds of announcements from different universities about closures, about changing schedules, about going to virtual or hybrid approaches. And you talked about the fourth industrial revolution. Some people are saying, hey, this is just going to accelerate that, and a more distance learning approach will become a more standard way of university education. So how are you thinking about what the future of a university education, a graduate program, what does it look like?
Absolutely. Well, and it's very much mirrors this kind of temporal framework that I was trying to share. Pre-COVID, we already knew, like Arizona State, as you know, our fundamental principle is we judge ourselves by who we include, not who we exclude. Okay, we know that there are millions and millions and millions of individuals around the world that are being excluded from education, from pre-K all the way to university education. Let's take university education. Pre-COVID, we knew already that we had to embrace the digital transformation, the fourth industrial revolution, that the only way to create that quality, access, and inclusion was to use new technologies, to have what we call a digital global mindset, to think about the world in all of its complexity and diversity, all over, in different contexts, regional environments and cultural contexts and institutional environments, but also to recognize that to get to that level of scale, we had to use all of the assets at our disposal. So that's digital technologies, without question, in every sector, in every field, and higher education, perhaps as much as any, perhaps at the very frontier. I mean, the university, as you know, Raj, and everybody, is like the most long-standing institution on the planet. Nothing has lasted longer than the university anymore, right? And fundamentally, it's true. It hasn't changed dramatically since it was first. More people have come in.
The idea of a professor at the front of the classroom lecturing to students,
exactly.
That's been around forever.
Those standard operating procedures, and so the pandemic again has accelerated it, transformed it, pushed it in ways. We at Thunderbird and ASU felt like we were, and we're proud of this. We will take ownership of this. We were at the vanguard. We knew this was what we had to do if we wanted to really realize our vision of inclusion and sustainable and equitable prosperity. Okay, so what does that mean then? It means that we have to transform not only the way we supply, we create, co-create educational opportunities, but we have to educate in some sense our consumers, our citizens, our students, to recognize that the what they even think is appropriate education is probably not the right form. We have a lot of students and families who say, we're going what we call ASU Sync or Thunderbird Sync, digitally enhanced face-to-face synchronous education is not as good. It's not the same. It's not as good. Let's put it that way, as face-to-face. And we say it's not the same, but in many ways it can be as good, if not better. And I can give you lots of examples. I'll give you an example, very, very micro one, but I think for those of us who were like this, appreciate it. If one's a student in a typical classroom of hundreds of students, a large lecture class, how much time does one get really to engage with a faculty member? You're one of hundreds, if not thousands, in that classroom. Now, put that into a Zoom or whatever technology platform that you're going to Mural or some of the cool new ones, and you start to have breakout groups. You're able to ask privately questions to a faculty member where you may feel bashful or shy to do that in the midst of hundreds of people. So there are ways in which the technology can create opportunities for learning, engagement, of customization, which is a big part of what this world is about across. When we think about Amazon and everything else, it's about customization, right? 3D printing, it's about creating the customized experience. So that's really, in my view, the incredible opportunity
Is there a downside risk to this distance learning? I'm just thinking about potentially in the future, couldn't you see distance learning being more open to lots of people, but then really only an elite can afford to kind of go on campus and have that campus experience where that's, part of it's engaging with professors, but a lot of it's engaging with other students and building these lifelong bonds. There's already quite a sense of elitism, right? Where people go to top institutions, they network with each other. That's a big reason people go. They go for the brand, they go for the network. So could you have some challenge here where you end up opening up education to lots more people through distance learning, but actually creating more inequality between those who are able to do on campus and those who aren't? How do you think about that? I hear lots of people in our community say, well, I want to get this credential, so I'm going to do an online version of a graduate program or certificate or something.
Yeah.
Is it really apples to apples?
So it's a great question. And I don't look, that's where I'll say we don't have all the answers on this. But here are some of the traces of that we're starting to, and the senses we have. We can create hybrid models where there's incredible, again, both synchronous and asynchronous digitally enhanced learning opportunities that is customized to an individual's needs, aspirations, health conditions, family conditions, economic conditions, all of that. We can marry that with a set of different types of in-person, face-to-face, immersive opportunities that may not be the traditional classroom or the traditional residential, community. Think about a liberal arts college as perhaps the most pure form of that residential transformative experience. That's not the right experience for every student. It's not the right experience for every individual. What we want to create is a range of possible ways that that individuals can be empowered educationally and be connected and have rich experiences, connected experiences. And that's, in my view, the new blended world, the continuum that is possible. I guess the last thing I just say is that for the jobs of the future, and education should not just be about the jobs of the future and jobs, but it's certainly, we are also pragmatists and realists. People need jobs, people need employment, need livelihoods. We are already seeing that our students are so competitive on the job market because the world is never going back. We know the world is never going back. Companies are going to be virtual, quasi-virtual, blended virtual, everything. We're not going back to an in-person world. the way we did. And so we actually are obligated to help our students be able to succeed in this world, to be leaders in this new world, to create this world. So if we in education, shy away from that responsibility, we are not actually living up to our obligation to them, to prepare them for the future of work. And that's why it's as important. It's as important because we can create these experiences, but that their opportunities going forward depends on it.
How do you think about that future of work, specifically when it comes to the development humanitarian worlds, right? I mean, you've been in and around these communities for your whole career. Do you think there's going to be a massive shift? You're saying, life is not going to go back to the way it was after this pandemic. How are you thinking about those careers? What are you hearing from students and faculty about it?
Well, I mean, we're at early days, and I think I would love to hear your thoughts on it, because you're such a profound thinker and practitioner on these, as is all of the DevX and our community here. Look, I think there's three things right now that we see. One is that the shift that has already been underway to localization. That is to say, people from their own communities empowered to take control of their own destinies is just going to even accelerate and amplify and accentuate even more. The time of sort of the development set. You remember this from our when we were young and students, right? That that was already underway in terms of being transformed. But I think that is completely a thing of the past. Okay.
The kind of closed club of international.
That's right. We run around. That's right, exactly. And we, the lords of the the development world. It's the democratization, the full and extensive democratization of global development. That's what is one big trend. But then the question becomes, because I've said it several times, the global ecosystem of innovation and sharing and dissemination and uptake and adaptation and so forth, that's still absolutely essential. And that's where the digital world becomes ever more important, right? Because we in our local context doing development, and development no longer being just development out there in frontier societies or poor countries or the global south, but development everywhere. Development is now truly global, not just global in the sense of the international set looking down and doing what they did, but it's global development here in the United States. We see it, right? I mean, if any place needs development right now, look at the United States. So there's no society that will not be part. And so in some sense, the time of true global development may have come and should be here, I think. And the digital transformation and the technology, this digital global mindset is going to be there. The last piece is, I think, that the fundamental transformation of these sectoral boundaries that has already been blurred and crossed, and new hybrids and partnerships and networks and social enterprises and all of those things, it's going to be turbocharged even more. And so we have to have as I mentioned, digital global mindsets, but digital cross-sectoral, multi-stakeholder global mindsets. We have to draw on everything that the private sector can and should offer. We have to draw on everything, government, civil society, academic institutions. But then we have to invent the new institutions, the new business models, the new innovations that cross and blur and bring together the best of all these different sectors. So I think those three are now, they were already, again, underway. And it's like this, sort of, it just has taken on it's on turbocharge now.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to look at it. I agree with you. The development is changing a lot, but that's going to create all kinds of opportunity for people who are like-minded, who want to see the world be a better place, their own community and other societies. There's going to be huge opportunity, but it's going to be very different probably than the way it was in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, let's take the sustainable development paradigm and go back to the SDGs. Yes, we've come such a long way since Rio 1992, right? World Conference on Environment and Development, where we started to really think about this intersection. I just, again, the demographic transformation of the world the average age of an individual in Africa being 18. This new generation of Gen Y, Gen X, Gen Z being radically interconnected through everything now, TikTok, whatever the next thing will be, right? That value sets where it's not even a question anymore that environmental sustainability is a core principle, right? So those things will now, it's not even a debate in some sense, right? But of course, why would it be any other way? And again, I think the pandemic has, kind of accelerated this, what was already happening. It's made it clear that this is the only way. This is the way. And of course, it's not the only way, because we'll continue to learn. We're a learning species. We have to continue to learn. But that transition, that demographic, sort of motivated and instantiated transition, I think is now fully in charge, so to speak.
Sanjeev, we've had a few questions come in, and we probably don't have time to get all of them, but at least one I'd like to bring up, which is from Vijay Gupta, who says, hey, there's a possibility the pandemic goes away in a few weeks or months. Will things go back to before? How do you think about that? Is it possible we're overstating the changes that could come from this?
Vijay, I wish the pandemic would go away in a few weeks, and a couple of months. I don't see that happening. I really, honestly don't. First of all, I just don't see factually that being likely. Low probability. If it happened, I'll be the first one to say I was completely wrong, and I'm happy I was completely wrong. Even if it did, we're never going back. We're never going back. The private sector, AMC, the film industry, you name it, the travel industry, every industry has been, fundamentally disrupted. Governments, as we can see around the world, you start off with how much fiscal space do they have? How much monetary space do they have? What levers do they have to make, we're never going, in my view, no, we're never going back. It's now about embracing, it's resilience, to be sure, which has been a language in a sort of a framework, a mindset. It's agility, and it's compassion. And I think that, I want to end with that, Raj, unless I'm happy to answer more question, is that no more time than ever do I believe that we need a new brand, a new type, a new form of global leadership and management. And that's why we're so committed at Thunderbird to helping, empowering, supporting this new generation of global leaders and managers that have this digital global mindset, that embrace uncertainty and complexity, that have a passion for bringing the world together in diverse cultures and all the rest, but also think about the world in really, really different ways, and are willing to be comfortable in uncomfortable circumstances. That, in my view, the pandemic has just made even more clear. We need those global leaders and managers ever more.
I was having a conversation, one of these discussions with Sam Worthington, who's the head of Interaction, the Association of NGOs, and he was saying the key for an NGO leader right now is adaptability. And it's very similar to what you're saying for a corporate or as a social leader, sector, right?
Absolutely. And public leader, private sector, absolutely.
This kind of flexibility of thinking, yeah. And I guess to Vijay's question, I would just add that most of the epidemiologists I'm speaking with do think that this is going to go on much longer. There could be multiple waves. And many of them remind us that this is not the last pandemic, that, pandemics are likely to be more common in a changing climate with human incursion on biodiverse landscapes and with globalization and more interconnectedness. So even if we get through this one in a way that's easier than some of the worst case scenarios, presumably major corporations, governments, universities, and others are going to be saying, hey, how do we prepare for the next one? We can't just go back to the way things were.
Absolutely. And it's fundamentally changed our psyches all over the world. I mean, I think the way I put it also, Raj, is that everybody has mourned in one way or another something that's happened because of the pandemic. It may be the most awful, which is a loss of life, a loss of a loved one. But it could be, and often is, going back to us in education, why we wanted to create this as as enriched graduation experience, not being able to graduate. You were asking about in-person, that graduation experience for a first generation student, their families, they work so hard. They want to be there to celebrate that incredible achievement. How do you do that?
How was it for you to hand out the diplomas to robots? How did that feel?
Well, I'm sort of a geek and I love science fiction. And when it was decided that obviously we couldn't do an in-person graduation, I said to my team, I want robots. And they thought I was completely nuts, Raj. Like, what do you mean robots? And I was like, we can't do it and so forth. I was like, I'm a pretty easygoing guy. I'm not much of an authoritarian leader, but it was probably the only time where I said, I'm not asking, I want robots. I want robots. And it was not just to show and practice what we preach, which is there are all these new technologies, and how do we embrace them and use them and experiment and learn with them to create new experiences. And two, though, that we want to show that to our students and their families that we're doing everything in our power to celebrate them, their incredible achievements. And I'll be honest, the students were kind of like, really? You're kidding me, right? And then they started actually, manipulating the robot from where they are with their families. This goes back to my point about we're in a co-journeying experience in I'm just using education with our students. We have to jointly create the educational experience of the 21st century. So giving, it was great. It was tiring. I'll be honest. We did it over 3 days, and handing, and talking to robots is a weird kind of feeling, or avatar robots. But I have to say, we tried to do, again, with everything at Thunderbird, bringing the very best of the past and the future. We have a flag ceremony where students from around the world who are graduating share about where they come from and their native language and the beauty that, comes from their culture to, so that was sort of our tradition. And there was others to this avatar robot celebration. And the point was, again, we can create experiences that are joyful, that are celebratory, that are different, but still provide meaning. And, I guess I do come back to that. We are humans, and I use this term in a letter that I'm about to send out about Ubuntu. I worked very closely with Archbishop Tutu for many years, and one of my, great mentors and the great people of our world. And that, he didn't invent it, but he certainly brought it to many of us, that notion of Ubuntu. I'm a person because I'm connected to other persons. I am human because I'm connected to you, Raj. And so that may now be digital, but we are still going to be connected. And that was part of the inspiration behind the Avatar Robot graduation ceremony.
Well, Sanjeev, it's always fantastic to talk to you, especially at a moment like this, so much uncertainty, so much change. Just getting your big picture take from somebody like you, who's such a big thinker and leader on these issues. Thank you for taking some time. Thank you to everybody who's joined us.
Thank you, everyone. Yeah. Please stay safe and healthy, Raj. Everyone, please stay safe and healthy. Be compassionate.